Hey, how's it going, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel and to the 64th episode of The Rolling Stone. Hope that you all had a glorious Independence Day, had a happy 4th of July, as glorious and happy as it could be, with civilization crashing down around our ears and a pandemic still flying across the world. Hope that you were able to at least do some of the things that Americans should do to celebrate Independence Day and our country's birthday. We are locked and ready. We are flying today, just fair warning, gang, we are flying today from the seat of our pants. We're flying from the seat of our pants. And I don't know if that's a really bad Foghorn Leghorn impersonation or a really crummy Yosemite Sam impersonation, or if it's some weird hybrid of the two. And I just realized I don't know if people today even know who Foghorn Leghorn or Yosemite Sam is, so I might have just revealed how out of step I am with the culture. But never mind that, on with the show. The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not been getting a lot of love here on the Stone, with very good reason. When you legally dissolve biological sex, you're not really going to be one of my favorite institutions, FYI. But surprise, surprise, miracles will still happen. Wonders will not cease, even in the midst of chaos and despair, because the Supreme Court actually handed down a wise and good decision. It ruled this past week that the Little Sisters of the Poor, Catholic religious organization, does not have to pay for health insurance plans that cover artificial contraception. Because, in case you don't know, if you're Catholic, contraception is not kosher. Gonna borrow a word from our Jewish brethren. Contraception is not kosher. Now, I know that if you look at the numbers, Catholics actually contracept a lot, so you might think, yeah, it's a rule that no one follows, but still, rules are rules. And the Little Sisters of the Poor actually acted like Catholics and said, no, we cannot buy these health insurance plans that cover contraception because that goes against our faith. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, like I said, actually ruled correctly and said, no, you don't have to do that. Doing that would be a violation of your religious liberty. Because in essence, we would be saying, the government would be saying, that you have to give up your faith in order to still do what you do in the public square, which is, FYI, serving the poor. What everyone is supposed to do. What everyone actually complains that no one does enough of. Nobody is taking care of the poor. No one's looking after the poor. Well, the Little Sisters are doing it every single day. There was a lot of celebratory cork popping over this decision. I saw a great tweet, actually, from a lawyer. I forget his name. His name went right out of my mind. But he was saying that this actually continues a trend. Within the past couple of years, 15 religious liberty cases have made their way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has actually ruled wisely and correctly in all of those 15 cases. This being the latest one, this Little Sisters case. And so he was really popping the champagne, saying, it's great, we're winning at the Supreme Court. I am not so enthusiastic. Now, don't get me wrong, I am tickled to death that the Supreme Court actually ruled correctly on a case for once, but I don't think that it's the great victory that some people are making it out to be. And I understand that in this day and age, you've got to take good news wherever you can take it. But even so, I think that we need to keep everything in proportion. And the best way that I saw it kept in proportion was by Ryan T. Anderson, who's a young buck over at the Heritage Foundation. One of the best defenders of biological reality and marital reality. Someone who you really should be following on Twitter and whose stuff at the Heritage Foundation you really should be reading and following. But he was saying that it's not really that big of a victory because the very fact that 15 religious liberty cases made their way all the way up to the Supreme Court shows not only that people were trying to take away or violate people's religious liberty, but that the culture and the lower courts were tossing out the First Amendment right and left because all of these cases had to go all the way up to the Supreme Court in order to be decided. That's not a good trend to have. But we're not here really to talk about the Supreme Court case. We're not here to talk about the decision itself or to analyze it. We are here to talk about Joe Biden's reaction to the case. I really should write an email to the Trump campaign and suggest to them that they get rid of the Sleepy Joe moniker, because really that doesn't do much for me. I don't think it does much for a lot of people, honestly. I would say that instead of calling him Sleepy Joe, we call him Groundhog Joe. Groundhog Joe, who is in his house in Delaware, at an undisclosed location, and every once in a while his campaign will pop him up. They'll put him up on a stick and prop him up, give him a script and say these lines, and then they'll pull him back down. I mean, in all seriousness, it's really sad to see. If we lived in a half-sane world, and if it was anyone else than Joe Biden, we would be outraged by this. I hope that we would be outraged by this, because we would rise up and say that this is not how you treat elderly people here in America. This is not how you treat people who are obviously mentally deteriorating right in front of our eyes. But be that as it may, they popped him up. His campaign, Groundhog Joe's campaign, popped him up, and he released a statement concerning this Supreme Court case. And he let it be known that if he is elected president, he will actually reverse this Supreme Court case. He will, in essence, force the Little Sisters of the Poor to violate their faith if they want to keep working in the public square. This is what Joe Biden said. This is his statement. Quote, "Healthcare is a right that should not be dependent on race, gender, income, or zip code. Yet, as a result of today's decision, countless women are at risk of losing access to affordable preventive care. I am disappointed in today's U.S. Supreme Court decision that will make it easier for the Trump-Pence administration to continue to strip health care from women, attempting to carve out broad exemptions to the Affordable Care Act's commitment to giving all women free access to recommended contraception. As disappointing as the Supreme Court's ruling is, there is a clear path to fixing it. Electing a new president who will end Donald Trump's ceaseless attempts to gut every aspect of the Affordable Care Act. If I am elected, I will restore the Obama-Biden policy that existed before the Hobby Lobby ruling, providing an exemption for houses of worship and an accommodation for nonprofit organizations with religious missions. The accommodation will allow women at these organizations to access contraceptive coverage not through their employer-provided plan, but instead through their insurance company or a third-party administrator." Unquote. First and foremost, this just shows the hypocrisy again of the left. Because if you notice, when the court rules like the left wants it to rule, then it is the voice of God. It's like Emperor Palpatine, almost. All-powerful. It has spoken. There is nothing left for us to do but obey. This was really, really shown, actually, a few weeks ago when the court legally dissolved of biological sex. Because Pete Buttigieg, if you remember him, he was the former mayor, a former Indiana mayor who was running for president. He was getting after Senator Josh Haley, because Josh Haley was one of the very few people in Congress, or in the public at all, who was really just tearing this decision apart. He was saying this is illegal, it is extra legislative, it does all of these things. And Pete Buttigieg was saying, oh, well, you just don't like it that the Supreme Court ruled in the way that you didn't want it to rule. And Josh Haley brought up the fact that Pete Buttigieg, when he was still running for president, had proposed that we actually change the structure of the Supreme Court. We don't have just 9 justices anymore, but that we extend it. We have more justices so that, of course, a progressive president could stuff the Supreme Court so that they would be assured of getting all of the rulings that they want. When the Supreme Court rules in their favor, it's the voice of God. When it doesn't rule in their favor, all of a sudden, it can be that ruling can be overruled, it can be ignored, it can be blown up, destroyed, drowned, whatever. But that's just an accidental here, because that is to be expected. What really, really fascinates me is that Joe Biden has basically shown himself to be unworthy of the presidency. If we lived again in a half-sane world, we the people would rise up from both ends of the political spectrum. We would rise up and we would say, okay, pal, you are ineligible to run for president. And failing that, there would be some, elective commission, an electoral commission, which would say you have blatantly shown yourself to be unworthy of even running for this position. Take a hike, go back to retirement. And the reason why I say this is because what Joe Biden made a campaign promise to violate the Constitution. He has said that if he is elected president, he is going to force the Little Sisters of the Poor to give up their faith in order to keep working in the public square. So, if I'm president, I'm going to violate the Constitution. Now, people might be saying at this point, but Nate. He said that he was going to make exemptions for religious organizations and for religious houses of worship. So everything is okay. That is a lie. That is a lie, because the Obama-era exemption was smoke and mirrors, to put it politely. It was baloney, as Joe Biden himself might say. No, not baloney. Malarkey, as Joe Biden would say. It was a bunch of malarkey. And back in 2012, the now deceased conservative commentator Charles Krauthammer explained why it was smoke and mirrors and malarkey. This is what Charles Krauthammer said about the Obama-era religious exemption for contraception in 2012. Quote, President Obama's birth control accommodation was as politically successful as it was morally meaningless. It was nothing but an accounting trick that still forces Catholic and other religious institutions to provide medical insurance that guarantees free birth control, tubal litigation, and morning after abortificants, all of which violate church doctrine on the sanctity of life. The trick is that these birth control abortion services will supposedly be provided independently and free of charge by the religious institution's insurance company. But this changes none of the moral calculus. Holy Cross Hospital, for example, is still required by law to engage an insurance company that is required by law to provide these doctrinally prescribed services to all Holy Cross employees. So in other words, just because the Catholic institution, the Catholic hospital, or the religious order, just because it is not required by the law to personally provide free birth control or free abortificants, but just has to partner with a third-party insurance company that provides those things for their employees, they're still violating the teachings of the Catholic Church, the very thing that actually gives them their identity as a Catholic institution and organization. So as Dr. Krauthammer was saying, okay, this is smoke and mirrors. It's supposed to be an exemption. It's supposed to be an accommodation, when really it just kind of plays with the numbers a little bit, and you get morally the very same dilemma that you had before. So that's why Joe Biden is saying, I'm going to violate religious liberty, and I am going to force these nuns to violate their faith in order to stay in the public square. Now, in my book, and in all of our books, regardless of whether we're right, left, center, conservative, progressive, libertarian, independent, I don't know, pachycephalosauruses, I don't care. This should automatically make Joe Biden ineligible for the presidency, because one of the sad things, or one of the deteriorations which I think has happened, especially in presidential politics, particularly in this case presidential politics, is that we no longer focus on what the job of the president is supposed to be. I've been paying attention to politics in some shape or form for now 20 years, which I really don't like to think about. But in presidential elections, it seems like that they all boil down to, what will the president do for me? Will the president, for example, give me new jobs? Will the president expand social safety nets? Will the president increase the budget for the military to keep us safe? Will the president actually abolish ICE and Border Patrol agencies so that we can enforce social justice on the country? Will the president actually enforce federal laws, or will the president ignore federal law for the social justice purposes? Again, that's what presidential politics has boiled down to. But really, it's not about what the president can do or won't do for us. If you wanted to boil down the job description of the president, it's right there in the oath of office that he takes on Inauguration Day. Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, when you unpack that, of course, you get into all the duties. So, of course, that means that the president has to enforce federal law, because as the head of the executive branch, that's his job. Congress makes the laws, the president enforces the law, the Supreme Court does, well, basically now the Supreme Court is the galactic arbiter and is the voice of God, except when it's not. And all three branches are supposed to fight and bash each other over the head with their respective canes to try and make, as they make the government work. That is the job of the president. It's not about who can increase health care. It's not about who can create the most jobs. It's not about, as important as it is, it's not even fundamentally about protecting the border or anything like that. It is the Constitution. That is what he swears to preserve, protect, and defend. The very fact that Joe Biden has publicly announced, made it a campaign promise, to violate the very thing which he wants to swear to preserve, protect, and defend, is asinine. It is a contradiction in terms. Joe Biden is asking us to make him the protector of the Constitution, and as an argument for that, he is saying that he is going to violate the Constitution. That should raise the bile and the gall of every single red-blooded American, man, woman, and child. You do not do this. You do not make a campaign promise to break and violate the very thing that you are supposed to protect and preserve and defend for us. Remember, he's not doing it for his own jollies. He's doing this for us, the people. We're his boss. He wants us to become his boss. And he wants us to put him in charge of our heritage, our political heritage at the very least, as incarnated in the Constitution. And that is the very thing that he has promised to violate. That is what he has done. And it really, really reminds me of a great scene in Mel Gibson's movie, The Patriot. Yes, I am a fan of that movie. I know that it's Hollywood history. Call it a guilty pleasure if you want. But there's a great scene in the first third of the movie where Jason Isaacs' character, Lucius Malfoy, FYI, if you watched the Harry Potter movies when you were a kid, his Colonel Tavington, based on a real-life British soldier in the American Revolution, Colonel Tarleton, he's just been introduced to Adam Baldwin's character, who is a colonial. He's a native of South Carolina. He's been made a captain in the cavalry outfit that Jason Isaacs leads. And Jason Isaacs asks Adam Baldwin, well, where do your loyalties lie? And Adam Baldwin responds, to king and country. And without missing a beat, Jason Isaacs asks, and why should I trust a man who is so willing to betray his neighbors? That is so insightful. It's great dialogue, and it's a great question. And it fits perfectly here. Because Joe Biden claims to be a Catholic. In other words, the Little Sisters of the Poor are his co-religious. Okay? He's saying that if he becomes president, not only is he going to violate the Constitution, but he is going to stab his co-religious, women who share his faith. He is going to stab them in the front, force them to give up the religion, supposedly that they all share, in order to appease his base. Now, if a man is willing to do that, if a man is willing to betray not only his own oath of office, but his own co-religious, the members of his own church, what is he going to do to the rest of us? That is food for thought. And that is story number one.